Okay, now let's talk about the profit. Very important. Profit is our goal, okay, is what we want. And the profit, we know it's total revenue minus total cost. Okay, this is a general function or formula, easy to understand. We said revenue covers everything, and revenue is not our true goal. We always want to consider the cost, okay? So revenue minus cost is gonna be the profit, what we have left in our pocket. And let's put the profit on the chart. Then you will get the point very easily. Okay, so the first chart we have here is the line of the revenue, right? That's the line between revenue and the demand, and we say it's a curve. Okay, and we have a maximum total revenue here. Okay, and to reach that point, we want to sell the demand at D hat, right? That's all we know. And also we know the cost. The chart number 2 is the cost, right? So we said we have fixed the cost as a flat line because it doesn't change along with how many units you sell. And we have variable cost, which changes along with the units you sell or you produce. And then the sum of them is the total cost. That's the line. Okay, so this is gonna be the line for the total cost for a specific demand. Okay, so if you want to know the profit, you're going to overlay these two charts together. This is the chart for total profit. Okay, let's see. So the curve is the total revenue, right? That's the curve. And then this straight line is total cost. So under any demand, let's see, this is a demand we want to take a look. Under this demand, maybe it's D0, okay? This is the total revenue, TR0. And this is your total cost, CT0. And what is the profit? We say the difference between these two is the profit, right? So this height is gonna be your profit. That's what we labeled out here as well. So at this point, D star, we haven't explained what D star is, but at D star, that's a specific demand. Under this demand, this is your profit, this is your this is your revenue, this is your cost, okay? And the difference between the revenue and the cost is profit. Cool. So the gray area, you see the interesting thing? The gray area from this to this point are where you have profit bigger than 0, because the total revenue line is above your cost line. Okay, which means revenue is higher than the cost. But out of this gray area, like here, if you're looking at the D here, maybe this D3, your cost is higher than your revenue. Wow, so you cost more than your income, which means your profit is a negative number. You're losing money, right? And the same thing happened to this side. If you're looking at a very high demand like a D4, okay, your cost is this, and your revenue is here. Okay, so cost 4 and the revenue 4. Your cost is higher, much higher than your revenue, which means you're losing money. Okay, so that's not what you want. You only want to stay in the gray area where you're making profit. Your profit is bigger than 0. Your revenue is higher than your cost, no matter at what demand, within this gray area. Interesting, right? Okay, so we know that there is a range of D1 prime and D2 prime. Between these 2 points, you are going to be within the gray area. Okay? Because this is, so D1 prime D1 prime and D2 prime. Okay, are where you have your profit, you have your revenue equals to your cost. Look at that, because at this point, your revenue and your cost intersects. Okay, so that's where your revenue equals to your cost. And same here. Revenue equals to your cost because they are intersecting with each other. And the revenue equals to your cost, that's a phenomenon we call break even. Okay, that's we call, no, that's not what we call break even, that's what we call even, right? Because it's even. What your income equals to your cost, it's even. And the area in between, the gray area, okay, so this area, we call it break even, because that's where you break the even case. You have higher profit, you have higher revenue, you have positive profit. Okay, and the D1 prime and D2 prime, they also have name. They're called break-even points or demands. Break-even demands. Okay? So when we say break-even demands, it's a range. It's a range between D1 prime and D2 prime. It's the range of this gray area. Okay? It's a range of the demand where you can make profit, where your profit is bigger than 0. So break-even points or break-even demands is very important. You want to just keep your demand within that range. Okay? And another important thing is look at this gray area. So for specific demand, like this demand, the length of this blue line is your profit, right? And if you have a higher demand, you're going to have this blue line, right? And this line, second line is longer than the first line, which means your profit is bigger than the first case. And then the line is longer and longer, which means your profit is bigger and bigger. And then at some point, here, the line reaches its longest length. Okay, so here is our maximum profit, like this label. Our maximum profit, which is super important for every businessman. You always want to maximize your profit, and this is when you make your profit maximized. Remember that, okay? So you're going to have the longest profit line in the gray area at this point. What is the point? That's the demand you want to know, the D star. Okay, so D star is also called optimal demand. Because that's where you have your optimal case. You have the biggest profit you can make. Okay, so at D star, you have your maximum profit. Okay, so this is also very important to you. So what's the takeaways from this chart? First thing, you can only make profit between D1 prime and D2 prime, between the range of break-even points. That's the gray area, okay? Outside of that area, you're losing money. That's the first thing. Second, you can have a point, you can have a demand called optimal demand. At this demand, you're going to make your profit maximized. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, the D star is different from D hat. Do you still remember the D hat? D hat is where you have the maximum revenue. Okay, so if you look down at the demand where you have the maximum revenue, that is the D hat. So D star is different from D hat. And the maximum total profit is different from maximum total revenue. Okay, so 3 things, 3 takeaways. I hope you can pause at this slide and then look at this chart and then try to figure out like the 3 takeaways I pointed out. Okay, first, what is the gray area? Why do you only make profit within that area, not outside? And what do you call the range? It's break-even. It's break-even demands, the range of the break-even demands, okay? And second, where do you have the maximum profit? And what's the demand called when you have the maximum profit? It's D star, optimal demand. And 3, where do you have the total revenue maximized? And what's the demand called for that, to have that total revenue maximized? It's D hat. And also the difference between D star and D hat, the difference between the maximum profit and the maximum revenue. These are the things you want to figure out by yourself. Okay, pause at this slide as long as possible, as long as you want, and think through all of this. All right, so after we have seen this chart, we already know that we can maximize our profit, and we can also know what is the optimal demand to maximize it. And we also are interested in the break-even points, D1 prime and D2 prime, right? So what function or what formula can we use? So first, the profit The profit is total revenue minus total cost. That's very easy to understand. But to calculate, we need to write it into a formula, right? So what is TR? The total revenue, did you remember that? We have written it as AD minus BD squared, right? So the total revenue is AD minus BD squared. And what is the total cost? Total cost is CF plus C lowercase v times D. Right? Nothing new. Just the old formulas, right? And so this is total revenue and this is total cost. Okay? And if you open the parentheses and you merge the same terms, you can have this formula. So minus BD squared plus A minus CV times D minus CF. That's the formula you're going to use to calculate the profit. But to calculate the profit, what you need to know is what is A, what is B, what is C lowercase v, what is D, and what is CF. Okay? And another formula you want to know is the optimal demand. D star. Where is the demand? You can reach your maximized profit. So D star is A minus CV, lowercase v, okay, over 2B. So whenever you know the A, the B, the C lowercase v, you can calculate your D star. You can calculate, okay, what is the demand to make the maximize the profit. And in case you want to know the maximize the profit, you just, what do? You replace the D with the D star in this first function. Then you can calculate your maximized profit. Okay? And the next formula is to calculate the D prime. D prime is D1 prime and D2 prime. Okay? You use this long function. Well, it is pretty long, but you don't have to remember that. You just use this function. We are open book, open notes when we do exams. So don't worry if you don't remember that, but you have to know how to use it. So here we have something interesting. We have plus minus. What does it mean? Okay, it means actually this is two formulas. Okay, so one formula is for D1 prime, which is because it's too long, so they want to write it in one formula. But actually, when you calculate, you need to do it separately. Okay, so D1 prime is minus A minus CV plus A minus C lowercase v square minus 4 times minus B times minus CF to the power of 1 over 2. The power of 1 over 2 means it's a square root, okay? And the whole thing, you want to divide the whole thing by 2 minus B. That's D1 prime. And what is D2 prime? So D2 prime is minus A minus CV. Now it's not plus, it's subtract A minus CV squared minus 4 times minus B times minus CF to the power of 1 over 2 over 2 minus B. So actually, this single function or formula can be divided into this one and this one for the D1 prime and D2 prime. And whenever you got the value of D1 prime and D2 prime, you can put it as a range, okay? So D1 prime, D2 prime, that's the range of profit, right? And we also call this to break-even points. You see, it's plural form, which means we got 2 points. Okay. All right. Now we have learned all the functions and formulas, and then what? So imagine that we have we know how to calculate the cost. How do we define, how do we decide which design method or which solution we go with when we want to make a decision, okay? So when do you want to use, we have a method called cost-driven design optimization. That's one method we can use to make decisions. And when could you use it? When revenues are not present or are constant among all alternatives. So your revenues are all the same for all options. We said we only focus on the differences. So if revenues are all the same, then we only focus on the costs, because only costs are gonna be different, right? So now we consider only costs. And how do we consider that? First, we always want to have the minimized cost, okay? So between different options, which one costs the least? That is the option we want to go with. Principle 2, select alternative with the least cost. Yeah, that's just what I said. So we want to minimize the cost. We want to select the one with the least cost. But it all depends on the fact that you already calculate the cost for each option.